The afternoon light had faded into evening. The great windows of the examination hall showed a sky painted in shades of purple and orange, as the sun of Varan set behind the distant mountains. No one had moved to turn on the lights. The aliens sat in growing darkness, their eyes fixed on the human standing on the platform below. Duhayan had been speaking for hours. His throat was dry and his legs were tired from standing, but he showed no sign of stopping. The story of human warfare was too important to rush. The lessons were too valuable to summarize. Instructor Vela had ordered food and water to be brought into the hall. Trays sat untouched on tables around the room. No one wanted to eat. No one wanted to miss a single word. "You have heard about Troy and Masada and Stalingrad," Dahyun said. "These are the famous sieges, the ones that appear in our history books and schools. But human siege warfare is not just about famous battles. It is about a way of thinking, a philosophy of resistance." He walked to the edge of the platform and looked up at the darkening sky through the windows. In our ancient times, a Chinese general named Sun Tzu wrote a book called The Art of War. It is more than 2,000 years old, and we still study it today. In this book, Sun Tzu wrote that the supreme art of war is to break the enemy's resistance without fighting. Dahyun turned back to the audience. This is the heart of siege warfare. You do not always need to kill your enemy. Sometimes, you only need to make them believe they cannot win. You surround them. You cut off their supplies. You show them that time is on your side. And eventually, they give up. A Villani officer in the middle rows raised one of his forearms. "But Sergeant Kim, you also told us stories where humans fought to the death, where they refused to give up even when it was hopeless. How do these two ideas fit together?" "Excellent question," Dahyun said, nodding. "The answer is simple. Humans use both approaches. When we are the attackers, we try to break our enemy's will without unnecessary death. But when we are the defenders, we become the ones who cannot be broken. We become the wall that does not fall." He began to pace slowly across the platform. "Let me tell you about a siege that happened less than 10 years ago by our calendar. This was not ancient history. This was modern warfare, fought with weapons that some of you might recognize." The hall grew even more quiet. Recent history felt more real, more immediate. It was easier to dismiss tales from thousands of years ago. But something that happened in living memory was different. There was a city called Mariupol, Dahyun said. It was located in a region called Ukraine, which was part of a larger nation that eventually became the Eastern European Federation. In that time, there was a war between Ukraine and a larger neighbor called Russia. Some of the older aliens shifted uncomfortably. They had heard about human conflicts. They had thought these were minor disputes, nothing compared to galactic wars. Now, they were not so sure. Russian forces surrounded Mariupol. They outnumbered the defenders by many times. They had tanks, artillery, aircraft, everything needed to crush a city. The logical choice for the defenders was to surrender. Fighting was hopeless. Everyone knew it. Dahyun stopped pacing. But a group of soldiers and civilians retreated into a massive steel factory called Azovstal. This factory had been built during an earlier era, with deep tunnels and bunkers beneath it. It was designed to survive bombing. The defenders decided to make their stand there. He held up 3 fingers. For 82 days, a few thousand people held that factory against an entire army. They were bombed every day. The buildings above ground were destroyed completely. But the tunnels held. The defenders fought back with whatever they had. The number seemed to echo in the darkness. 82 days. For beings who thought of sieges in terms of hours or days, it was an eternity. The Russian army tried everything, Dahyun continued. They sent in their best troops. They dropped the heaviest bombs. They cut off all food, water, and medical supplies. The defenders lived on rainwater and scraps. They performed surgery without anesthesia. They buried their dead in the tunnels and kept fighting. A young Courtney cadet spoke up, her voice trembling. How? How is this possible? Without food or water, without medicine, how did they survive for so long? Do-hyun looked at her with eyes that held memories of things he had seen himself. They survived because they refused to die. Because giving up was worse than any suffering. Because they knew that every day they held was a day their country used to prepare, to fight, to survive. He lowered his voice. In the end, the defenders were ordered to surrender by their own government. Not because they were defeated, but because their mission was complete. They had held the enemy in place for almost 3 months. They had tied down resources that could have been used elsewhere. They had become a symbol of resistance that inspired their entire nation. The Courtney cadet looked down at her hands. Her shell had changed color, becoming darker and rougher. A sign of deep emotional distress among her people. The soldiers who surrendered became prisoners, Do-hyun said. Many of them were tortured. Some were killed. But they are remembered as heroes. Their sacrifice was not wasted. The war continued, and eventually, a kind of peace was made. None of it would have been possible without those 82 days. In the back of the hall, Una Park felt tears forming in her eyes. She had known soldiers who served in that era. She had heard their stories directly, sitting around tables in military bases and veterans' halls. The official histories only captured part of what happened. The rest lived in the memories of those who were there. Instructor Vela stepped onto the platform beside Do-hyun. Her massive form moved slowly, as if the weight of what she had heard was pressing down on her. Sergeant Kim, she said, I must ask you something directly. In all my years of teaching military strategy, I have never encountered anything like what you have described. The coalition has fought wars. We have won and lost battles. But nothing in our history compares to the intensity of human warfare. She turned her compound eyes toward him. Why? Why do humans fight like this? What drives you to such extremes? Do-hyun was silent for a moment. It was a question that philosophers and generals had debated for centuries. He could give the academic answers, the theories about evolution and survival. But those answers felt hollow in this moment. I do not know if I can explain it fully, he said finally. We are a young species. We only recently discovered that we are not alone in the universe. Before that, we spent thousands of years fighting each other. We fought for land, for resources, for religion, for ideas. We fought because we were afraid or angry or proud. He paused and took a slow breath. But underneath all of that, there is something else. A fire that burns in us. A refusal to accept defeat. When we believe in something, when we love something, we will do anything to protect it. We will become monsters if we must. We will tear down the sky and burn the stars. The words seemed to hang in the air, glowing like embers in the darkness. This is why I asked my question at the beginning, Do-hyun continued. Ancient, modern, or classified. Each era represents a different level of that fire. In ancient times, we burned cities and salted the earth. In modern times, we destroyed nations and changed the map of our world. And the classified tactics? He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Commander Torak stood up again. His blue skin had returned to its normal color, but his eyes held a new understanding. Sergeant Kim, I believe I speak for many here when I say that this examination has changed how I think about humanity. I came here expecting to test a young species. Instead, I have been taught by a master. Do-hyun shook his head slowly. I am no master. I am only a soldier who knows his history. Any human marine could have given this lecture. Our knowledge of war is not special. It is simply thorough. We remember every battle because we cannot afford to forget. A soft murmur of conversation spread through the hall. Aliens turned to each other, discussing what they had heard. Some looked disturbed. Others looked thoughtful. A few looked genuinely frightened. Una Park rose from her seat and walked down the aisle toward the platform. The crowd parted for her, recognizing her uniform as matching Doyun's. She climbed the steps and stood beside her fellow Marine. "May I add something?" she asked, looking at Instructor Vila. The great insectoid nodded her head. "Please." Una turned to face the audience. She was shorter than Doyun, with a softer voice, but there was steel in her eyes. "Everything Sergeant Kim has told you is true," she said. "But there is one thing he has not mentioned. One lesson that is perhaps the most important of all." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "In all of human history, no siege has ever broken the human spirit. Cities have fallen. Armies have surrendered. Nations have been conquered. But the people always survived. They always rebuilt. They always fought back eventually. Our voice grew stronger. You can beat us. You can hurt us. You can even kill us. But you cannot make us give up. Because every human child is taught the stories that Sergeant Kim has shared tonight. We are raised on tales of resistance and sacrifice. We grow up knowing that our ancestors faced worse and did not break." She looked out at the sea of alien faces. "This is what you need to understand about humanity. We are not dangerous because of our weapons or our tactics." The silence in the examination hall lasted for what felt like an eternity. Instructor Vila stood completely still, her massive body frozen like a statue carved from stone. Her compound eyes reflected the light from the high windows, but they showed no emotion. Only her antennae moved, circling slowly as she tried to process the human's words. Do-hyun waited patiently. He had seen this reaction many times before. It was the same on every world, in every military academy and war council. The aliens always needed time to understand what he was telling them. Finally, Vila spoke. Her voice was slower than before, more careful. "You are saying that your species has multiple categories of siege warfare knowledge?" "Yes," Do-hyun replied simply. "And these categories span thousands of years? 5,000 years of recorded history. Probably longer, but we do not have good records from before that time." Vila's antennae stopped moving. This was a sign of deep thought among her people. "Sergeant Kim, I have studied the military histories of 47 species. None of them have required such categorization. War is war. Tactics are tactics. Why would humans need to separate their knowledge into different types?" Do-hyun took a slow breath. He had explained this before to admirals and generals and diplomats. Each time, it was the same. The aliens could not understand because they had never lived it. "Because our wars changed," he said. "The way we fought 5,000 years ago is very different from the way we fought 1,000 years ago. And the way we fought 1,000 years ago is very different from the way we fought 100 years ago. Our technology changed. Our societies changed. Our understanding of war changed. Each era developed its own methods, its own tactics, its own philosophy of siege warfare." He paused and looked out at the audience. Every alien was watching him with complete attention. Even the beings made of energy had focused their forms, becoming brighter and more solid. "Let me give you a simple example," Do-hyun continued. "In ancient times, a siege meant surrounding a city with soldiers and waiting for the people inside to run out of food and water. The attacking army would build walls and towers. They would use battering rams and ladders. They would dig tunnels under the city walls. A siege could last for months or years." He raised one finger. "But then we invented gunpowder. Suddenly, walls could be destroyed by cannons. Siege tactics had to change completely. The old methods became useless. New methods were created. He raised a second finger. Then we invented aircraft. Now armies could drop bombs from the sky. Walls meant nothing. Tunnels meant nothing. Siege warfare changed again. He raised a third finger. Then we invented missiles and nuclear weapons. A city could be destroyed in seconds. The very concept of siege warfare had to be reimagined. We developed new tactics for urban combat, for guerrilla resistance, for holding ground against overwhelming force. Dahan lowered his hand. Each change created a new era of warfare. Each era has its own lessons, its own strategies, its own wisdom. That is why I must ask which type you want me to discuss. The examination hall buzzed with quiet conversation. Cadets whispered to each other in a dozen different languages. The translation devices that everyone wore struggled to keep up with the flood of words. Commander Torak, the four-armed Villani, stood up from his seat in the front row. Instructor Vila, if I may speak? Vela nodded her massive head. Torak turned to face Doyen. His blue skin seemed darker than before, a sign of concern among his people. Sergeant Kim, you mentioned classified information. What does this mean? What kind of siege tactics would be considered secret? Dohim met the commander's eyes calmly. I cannot tell you that, sir. That is why they are classified. But surely you can give us some idea, some general description. Don thought for a moment. He had to be careful here. There were things he was not allowed to say, not to anyone outside the human military command. But he could give them a hint, a small taste of what humans were capable of. I can tell you this much, he said slowly. Classified siege tactics include methods that were developed in the last 50 years. They involve technologies and strategies that most species have not yet discovered. They are designed for situations that I hope will never happen. He paused. They are designed to hold ground against forces that outnumber us by 1,000 to 1. They are designed to continue fighting when all hope seems lost. They are designed to make any enemy pay such a terrible price for victory that they will think twice before attacking us again. The hall fell silent once more. Dohin could see fear in some of the alien faces. Not fear of him personally, but fear of what he represented. Fear of a species that had spent so long fighting itself that war had become an art form. Dot in the back of the hall. Yuna Park watched the scene unfold. She remembered her own training, the endless hours of study and practice. She remembered learning about Stalingrad, about Iwo Jima, about the countless battles where humans had refused to surrender, even when surrender was the only logical choice. She remembered the first lesson that every human Marine was taught. Victory is not always about winning. Sometimes it is about making the enemy regret the fight. Instructor Vela finally spoke again. Her voice was quieter now, almost soft for someone of her species. Sergeant Kim, I will ask for ancient tactics. Please begin your demonstration. Don nodded. He had expected this choice. The aliens always wanted to start with the past. They thought ancient tactics would be simple, easy to understand. They thought they could handle stories from thousands of years ago. They were wrong about that too. Very well, he said. I will begin with one of the most famous sieges in human history, the Siege of Troy. He stepped to the center of the platform and began to speak. His voice was calm and steady, the voice of a teacher sharing knowledge with students. More than 3,000 years ago, on a part of Earth called the Mediterranean region, there was a city called Troy. It was a powerful city with high walls and strong defenses. An alliance of Greek kingdoms wanted to destroy this city and take its wealth. Dahian's eyes swept across the audience. The Greeks gathered a great army and sailed across the sea to Troy. They surrounded the city and demanded its surrender. The Trojans refused, and so began a siege that would last for 10 years. A murmur went through the crowd. 10 years. Even by human standards, This was a long time. For 10 years, Dohyun continued, the Greeks camped outside the walls of Troy. They fought battles. They raided nearby towns. They tried again and again to break through the city's defenses. But the walls held. The Trojans had food and water. They had weapons and warriors. They could not be defeated by direct assault. He paused for effect. So the Greeks decided to use a different tactic. A tactic that we now call deception. The hall grew very quiet. Everyone sensed that something important was coming. The Greeks built a giant wooden horse, Dohyun said. It was hollow inside. They hid their best warriors in the belly of the horse. Then the Greek army sailed away, leaving only the horse behind. He smiled slightly. The Trojans thought they had won. They thought the Greeks had given up and gone home. They found the horse and believed it was a gift from the gods. They brought it inside their city walls. Dohyun's voice grew lower. That night, while the Trojans celebrated their victory, the Greek warriors climbed out of the horse. They opened the city gates. The Greek army, which had only sailed out of sight and then returned, rushed in. Troy fell in a single night. The city was burned. Its people were killed or enslaved. A siege that could not be won by strength was won by cleverness. He let the story sink in. Around the hall, aliens exchanged glances. Some looked confused. Others looked disturbed. A young Courtney cadet raised her hand. Vela nodded at her. Sergeant Kim, the cadet said, are you saying that humans consider deception to be an acceptable tactic in warfare? Dohyun looked at her directly. We consider deception to be essential. War is not a game with rules. War is survival. We will do whatever is necessary to protect our people and defeat our enemies. The cadet's shell seemed to darken. But is that not dishonorable? Among my people, warriors must face their enemies openly. Dohyun thought about his answer carefully. This was a question he had heard many times. Each species had its own ideas about honor in war. But humans had learned long ago that honor was a luxury that dead soldiers could not afford. Among my people, he said finally, the highest honor is to bring your soldiers home alive. A clever victory is better than a brave defeat. We remember the commanders who saved their troops, not the ones who led them to glorious death. He gestured toward the watching cadets. The Trojan horse teaches us an important lesson. When you cannot break through a wall, go around it. When you cannot win by force, win by intelligence. Siege warfare is not just about weapons and soldiers. It is about understanding your enemy and finding their weakness. Instructor Vila stepped forward. Her compound eyes were fixed on Dohyun with an intensity that he had not seen before. This is only one example from ancient times? She asked. One of many, Dohyun confirmed. I could speak for days about ancient sieges alone. The siege of Masada, the siege of Syracuse, the siege of Constantinople. Each one has its own lessons, its own tactics, its own tragedy. Vila's antennae trembled. And you said that modern tactics are different? That they changed with your technology? Completely different. Modern siege W. Completely different. Modern siege warfare makes the ancient methods look like the examination hall had changed. What had started as a routine test of military knowledge had become something else entirely. Cadets sat forward in their seats, their bodies tense with attention. Instructors from other departments had quietly entered the room, drawn by whispers that something unusual was happening. Even the guards at the doors had turned to watch. Dohyun stood on the platform like a statue. He was calm, his hands clasped behind his back in the traditional military position. But inside his mind, memories were stirring. Memories of lessons learned and battles fought. Memories of the price that humans had paid to gain their knowledge of war. Instructor Vila had asked him to continue. She wanted to hear more about ancient siege tactics before moving to the modern era. Do-hyun understood her logic. She was trying to build a foundation, to understand the beginning before learning about the end. But she did not know how deep the foundation went. "Let me tell you about the siege of Masada," Do-hyun said. His voice was softer now, carrying a weight that the audience could feel. This happened about 2,000 years ago in a region of Earth called Judea. He paused and took a breath. This story was harder to tell than the fall of Troy. Troy was about victory and cleverness. Masada was about something else entirely. A group of Jewish rebels fled from the Roman Empire. They took shelter in a fortress called Masada, built on top of a mountain in the desert. The fortress was almost impossible to attack. The cliffs were too steep to climb. The only path to the top was narrow and easily defended. The rebels thought they were safe. Do-hyun's eyes grew distant. The Roman army surrounded the mountain. They numbered 15,000 soldiers. The rebels inside numbered fewer than 1,000, including women and children. A soft gasp came from somewhere in the audience. The numbers were shocking. 15,000 against less than 1,000. It should have been a quick victory. The Romans tried to attack up the path, Do-hyun continued. The rebels pushed them back. They tried again and again. Each time, they failed. The mountain was too strong, the defenders too determined. He turned slowly, making eye contact with different sections of the audience. So the Romans did something that no one expected. They decided to build a ramp. Confused murmurs spread through the hall. A ramp? What did that mean? The Romans gathered thousands of workers. Soldiers, slaves, prisoners. They brought massive amounts of earth and stone. And day by day, month by month, they built a ramp up the side of the mountain. It took them almost a year. But when it was finished, the ramp allowed them to bring their siege weapons to the walls of the fortress. Do-hyun's voice dropped lower. The rebels watched this ramp being built. They watched their doom approaching, one load of dirt at a time. For almost a year, they knew they were going to die. But they did not surrender. They did not try to negotiate. They simply waited. The hall was completely silent. Not even the beings of energy moved. When the Romans finally broke through the walls, Do-hyun said, they found the fortress quiet. 960 people had lived inside. All of them were dead. They had chosen to take their own lives rather than become Roman slaves. Only 2 women and 5 children had hidden themselves and survived. He let the silence stretch. Let the weight of the story press down on the audience. This is what humans mean when we speak of siege warfare, he said finally. It is not just about tactics and strategies. It is about will. It is about how far people will go to resist, to survive, to make a stand. The Romans won the Battle of Masada, but the rebels won something else. They became a symbol. For 2,000 years, their story has been remembered. Masada shall not fall again became a saying among their descendants. Commander Torak stood up slowly, his forearms hanging loosely at his sides. His blue skin had turned pale, a sign of deep emotion among the Villani. Sergeant Kim, he said, are you telling us that humans will choose death over surrender? That you will fight even when there is no hope of victory? Do-hyun looked at the commander directly. Yes, not always. Not every human, but enough of us. When our homes are threatened, when our families are in danger, we become something different. We become capable of things that we ourselves do not fully understand. He stepped to the edge of the platform. Let me tell you another story. This one is more recent. Less than 100 years ago, by our calendar. In the back of the hall, Una Park felt a chill run down her spine. She knew which story was coming. Every human soldier knew it. In a part of Earth called Europe, there was a great war. Do-hyun began. The largest war in human history. Tens of millions of soldiers fought across thousands of kilometers. Nations rose and fell. Cities were destroyed. The death toll was beyond counting. He paused. In this war, an army from a nation called Germany invaded a nation called the Soviet Union. The German army was the most powerful in the world at that time. They had better weapons, better training, better leadership. They swept across the land like fire, destroying everything in their path. The audience leaned forward. Even those who knew nothing of human history could sense the magnitude of what they were hearing. The German army reached a city called Stalingrad. It was a major industrial center, important for producing weapons and supplies. The Germans attacked with everything they had. They bombed the city until almost nothing was left standing. They sent in their best soldiers, their best tanks, their best generals. Dahyun's voice hardened. The Soviet defenders refused to retreat. They fought in the ruins of buildings. They fought in the sewers beneath the streets. They fought room by room, house by house, sometimes hand to hand with knives and bare fists. When they ran out of ammunition, they threw rocks. When they ran out of food, they ate whatever they could find. They held on with nothing but determination and rage. He spread his arms wide. The siege lasted for 5 months. 5 months of constant fighting, constant death, constant horror. The temperature dropped so low that machines stopped working and soldiers froze to death where they stood. But still, the defenders held. The hall had become so quiet that Do-hyun could hear his own heartbeat. In the end, the Soviet army launched a counterattack. They surrounded the Germans who had come to surround them. The hunter became the hunted. The German army was destroyed. More than 800,000 soldiers from both sides died in and around that single city. He lowered his arms. 800,000. In 5 months. For one city. No one spoke. No one moved. The numbers were incomprehensible to beings who thought of war in terms of quick battles and decisive victories. Instructor Vila's antennae had stopped moving completely. Her compound eyes seemed darker than before, as if something inside her had dimmed. "Sergeant Kim," she said slowly, "these numbers cannot be correct. No species would sacrifice so many for a single location." "They are correct," Do-hyun replied. "I can provide the documentation if you wish. Human history is well recorded. We remember our dead." A young Enderan female raised her small hand. She looked frightened, her white fur standing on end. "Why?" she asked in a high voice. "Why would you fight like this? Why not retreat and fight somewhere else? Why die for a city that was already destroyed?" Do-hyun considered the question carefully. It was a question the humans themselves had debated for centuries. Why do we fight so hard? Why do we never give up? "Because retreat teaches the enemy that you will retreat," he said finally. "Because giving up one city makes it easier to give up the next city. Because sometimes you have to draw a line and say no further." The defenders of Stalingrad knew that if they failed, their entire nation might fall. So they decided to succeed or die trying. He looked at the young Enderan with something like gentleness. In human warfare, there is a concept we call the decisive point. It is the place where everything is decided, where victory and defeat are determined. For those 5 months, Stalingrad was the decisive point of the entire war. Everyone knew it. That is why they fought so hard. The Enderan lowered her hand slowly. Her large eyes were wet with what might have been tears. Unipark watched from her seat in the back. She remembered visiting Stalingrad once, many years ago. The city had been rebuilt, but there was a memorial there. A great statue of a woman holding a sword, standing on a hill overlooking the river. The Motherland calls, it was named. She remembered standing at the base of that statue and feeling very small. Humans did not fight because they loved war. They fought because they loved their homes, their families, their people. And when those things were threatened, they became something terrible, something that even other humans found hard to understand. Instructor Vela stepped forward again. Her voice was quiet, almost respectful. Sergeant Kim, you have spoken of ancient tactics and modern tactics. You have shown us that human siege warfare is far more complex than we imagined. But you also mentioned a third category, classified. Do-hyun nodded slowly. He had known this question would come. The classified category exists, he said, but I cannot speak about it in detail. I can only tell you that it exists and that I hope you never see it used. Vela's antennae twitched. Can you tell us nothing? Not even a hint of what such tactics might involve. Do-hyun was silent for a long moment. In his mind, he saw files marked with the highest security clearance. The morning sun of planet Varan rose slowly over the massive building that stood at the center of the Coalition Military Academy. The building was old and made of dark stone that had been carried from 12 different worlds. It was a symbol of unity among the stars. Inside its walls, the future officers of the Galactic Coalition learned the art of war. Sergeant Do-hyun Kim walked through the long hallway with his boots, making soft sounds on the polished floor. He was 32 years old, with short black hair and calm brown eyes that had seen more battles than most beings twice his age. His uniform was simple and clean, the dark blue fabric of the human Marine Corps fitting him perfectly. On his chest, he wore only 3 small medals. Most humans who had served as long as him would have many more, but Do-hyun did not care much for decorations. He was not supposed to be here. The academy was meant for young cadets who were just beginning their military journey. But the Coalition had requested that experienced soldiers from each member species come to teach and share knowledge. The humans had sent 12 of their finest, and Do-hyun was one of them. The hallway opened into a great examination hall. The ceiling was so high that it disappeared into shadow. Rows of seats rose up like stairs on all sides, forming a half circle around a central platform. Hundreds of alien cadets already filled those seats. They came in all shapes and sizes. Some had scales, others had fur. A few had no solid form at all, their bodies made of shifting light and energy. Do-hyun found his assigned seat in the front row, next to the other visiting soldiers. A tall being with blue skin and 4 arms nodded at him politely. This was Commander Torak of the Vellani people. On his other side sat a small creature covered in soft white fur. Her name was Mira, and she was from a world called Endara. She barely reached Do-hyun's waist, but her people were known for their sharp minds and quick thinking. "Human," Torak said in his deep voice, "you look calm. Are you not nervous about the examination?" Do-hyun shook his head slowly. "I have taken many tests in my life. This is just another one." Myra made a small laughing sound. "The humans are always so confident. I have heard that your species fights wars like others breathe air. Is this true?" Before Do-hyun could answer, a loud sound filled the hall. Everyone became silent and looked toward the main entrance. A massive figure walked in, each step making the floor shake just a little. This was Instructor Vela, a member of the Korthni species. She stood nearly 3 meters tall, with a hard shell covering her body like armor. Her head was triangular, with large compound eyes that could see in all directions at once. 2 long antennae rose from her forehead, moving constantly as they sensed the air. Vela reached the central platform and turned to face the assembled beings. When she spoke, her voice was like stones grinding together. "Welcome to the annual tactical examination," she said. "This year, we will test your knowledge of siege warfare." A murmur went through the crowd. Siege warfare was considered one of the most difficult subjects in military study. It required patience, planning, and a deep understanding of both attack and defense. Viola's antennae twitched. For those who do not know, A siege is when one force surrounds another and tries to force them to surrender. It is a test of will, resources, and strategy. Many battles in galactic history have been decided by sieges. Dalham listened quietly. He knew about sieges. Every human soldier did. It was part of their basic training, taught alongside marching and shooting. But he also knew something else. He knew that most alien species had very little experience with this type of warfare. The reason was simple. Most galactic conflicts were fought in space, with ships and weapons that could destroy entire planets. When armies did fight on the ground, they usually met in open battle. The idea of surrounding a city and waiting for months or years was strange to them. Their wars were fast and violent, decided in days or weeks, but human wars had been different. Humans had been fighting each other for thousands of years before they ever reached the stars. They had developed every type of warfare imaginable. And siege warfare was one of their oldest and most refined arts. Vela continued her introduction. Each of you will be called to the platform. You will be asked to explain siege tactics, either from your own species history or from your studies. You will be judged on your knowledge, your creativity, and your ability to think under pressure. The examinations began. One by one, cadets walked to the platform and answered questions. A young Vellani spoke about the siege of Mount Cora, where his ancestors had trapped an enemy army in a mountain pass for 6 days. A Courtney cadet discussed the defensive strategies used during the Crystal Wars. A being made of pure energy described how his people had once surrounded a star system by blocking all travel routes. Dohyun watched and listened carefully. The answers were good, but they were also limited. Each species had 1 or 2 examples, maybe 3 at most. They spoke of sieges that lasted days or weeks. They described tactics that were simple and direct. Myra was called to the platform. She spoke well about a famous siege from her world's history, where a small fortress had held against a much larger army for 12 days. The cadets in the audience seemed impressed. 12 days was considered a long siege by galactic standards. Dohyun said nothing, but inside his mind, he thought about the sieges of his own world. He thought about Masada, where Jewish rebels had held against the Roman Empire for months. He thought about the siege of Leningrad, which had lasted almost 900 days. He thought about all the cities that had been surrounded, starved, bombarded, and broken throughout human history. 12 days. The aliens thought 12 days was remarkable. Humans had sieges that lasted years. The morning passed slowly. More cadets came and went. The sun moved across the sky outside the great windows. Dohyun remained in his seat, waiting for his turn. He knew it would come eventually. The humans were always saved for last in these examinations. The other species were curious about them, eager to see what the newcomers to the galactic stage could offer. Finally, as the afternoon light began to fade, Instructor Vela turned her compound eyes toward the front row. "Sergeant Dohyun Kim of Earth," she announced. "Please come to the platform." Dohyun stood up slowly. He straightened his uniform and walked forward with steady steps. The hall became very quiet. Hundreds of eyes watched him move. He could feel their curiosity like heat on his skin. He reached the platform and turned to face the audience. Vela stood beside him, her antennae pointed directly at his face. "Sergeant Kim," she said, "the subject is siege warfare. Please share your knowledge with us." Dohyun looked out at the sea of alien faces. He saw their expectation, their curiosity, their slight sense of superiority. They thought they knew what war was. They thought they understood the depths of conflict. They were wrong. He opened his mouth to speak, and then he paused. A small smile appeared on his lips. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who knew something that others did not. "Instructor Vila," he said in a calm and clear voice, "before I begin, I need to ask you a question." Vela's antennae twitched in surprise. Cadets did not usually ask questions during examinations, but she nodded slowly. "You may ask." Dayun's smile grew just a little wider. "Do you want ancient, modern, or classified?" The words hung in the air like smoke after a fire. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The entire examination hall was frozen in confusion. Vela's compound eyes flickered. Her antennae moved in circles, a sign of uncertainty among her species. "I do not understand the question," she said finally. Dohyun nodded. He had expected this. "On Earth," he explained, "we have been practicing siege warfare for over 5,000 years. We have developed thousands of different tactics, strategies, and methods. Some are from our ancient history. Some are from our modern era. And some are classified military secrets that I am not allowed to share without special permission." He paused and let his words sink in. "So I need to know which type you want me to discuss. I cannot cover everything in one examination. There is simply too much." The silence in the hall grew deeper. Dahyun could see the realization spreading across the alien faces. They had expected him to share one or two examples, like everyone else. Instead, he was telling them that humans had so much knowledge of siege warfare that he needed to categorize it. In the back of the hall, a young human woman named Yuna Park sat among the observers. She was a lieutenant in the Marine Corps, sent to the academy as part of the same program as Dohyun. Her black hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and her dark eyes sparkled with amusement. She knew exactly what was about to happen. She had seen it before, on other worlds and in other halls. The moment when aliens realized that humans were not newcomers to war, they were masters of it. The Academy's main dining hall was usually a place of noise and activity. Cadets from dozens of species gathered there each evening to eat, talk, and build the relationships that would define their careers. But tonight, the hall was subdued. Conversations happened in low voices. Eyes kept turning toward the corner where the human delegation sat together. Dohyun ate slowly, not tasting his food. The examination had drained him more than he expected. Speaking about human warfare to aliens was different from discussing it with fellow soldiers. With soldiers, there was shared understanding. They knew the weight of the stories because they had lived similar ones themselves. But the aliens did not have that foundation. For them, each tale was new and shocking. Each number was a revelation. Each strategy was a window into a mind that thought about war in ways they had never imagined. Yuna sat across from him, pushing vegetables around her plate. The other human Marines at the table were quiet too. They had all watched the examination from different places in the hall. They had all seen the reactions. They knew that something had changed today. "Do you think we scared them too much?" Yuna asked quietly. Dohyun considered the question. Maybe, but they needed to understand. If we are going to be true partners in this coalition, they cannot see us as simple newcomers. They need to know what we are capable of. A young Marine named Ji-hoon Kang nodded slowly. He was the newest member of their group, fresh from his final training on Mars. "My instructor always said that allies who underestimate you are as dangerous as enemies who do. If they think we are weak, they will not take our advice seriously. They will make decisions without considering our perspective." "And now?" Yuna asked. "Now that they know?" Ji-hoon smiled slightly. "Now they will ask for our perspective on everything, whether we want them to or not." The meal continued in quiet conversation. Around the hall, groups of aliens kept glancing at their table. Some looks held curiosity. Others held something closer to fear. A few held what might have been admiration. After an hour, Instructor Vela entered the dining hall. Her massive form moved through the crowd with surprising grace. Cadets stepped aside to let her pass, bowing their heads in respect. She crossed the entire room and stopped at the human table. "Sergeant Kim, Lieutenant Park, may I join you?" Do-hyun stood and gestured to an empty chair. It was far too small for someone of Vela's size, but she managed to arrange herself beside them. Her compound eyes reflected the light from the ceiling fixtures. "I have been thinking about today's examination," she said. "About everything you shared with us. I have a question that I could not ask in front of the cadets." Do-hyun nodded. "Please ask." Vela's antennae moved slowly, a sign of careful thought. "You spoke of classified siege tactics, the Masada protocols. You said they are designed for a situation where humanity faces extinction. That is correct. My question is this." Vela leaned forward slightly, her massive head lowering toward the humans. "Have you ever used these protocols? Even once?" The table fell silent. The other Marines stopped eating and turned to listen. Even Jae-hoon, the youngest among them, understood the weight of this question. Do-hyun met Vela's compound eyes without flinching. "No, we have never used them." "Then how do you know they will work?" It was the question that any military leader would ask. Theory was one thing. Practice was another. Tactics that seemed clever on paper often failed in reality. Do-hyun thought about his answer for a long moment. He thought about the countless simulations and exercises. The war games played in deep bunkers, where officers pretended to lose everything and planned for the aftermath. The decisions that were made in hope that they would never need to be carried out. "We do not know for certain that they will work," he admitted. "No one can know such things until the moment arrives. But we have studied every siege in our history. We have learned from every failure and every success. The Masada protocols are built on 5,000 years of human experience. They represent our best understanding of how to resist when all hope seems lost." He paused. "And there is one more thing. The protocols are not just tactics and strategies. They are also a state of mind, a decision made in advance. When humanity faces extinction, every human will know what is expected of them. Every soldier, every civilian, every child old enough to understand. We will fight until we cannot fight anymore. And then we will find a way to keep fighting." Vela was silent for a long time. Her antennae had stopped moving completely. In the background, the noise of the dining hall continued, but at their table, there was only waiting. Finally, the great instructor spoke again. Her voice was different now, softer, almost gentle. "Among my species, there is a concept we call the final stone. It is the moment in a siege when the last defender falls. When the walls finally break and the enemy enters victorious. We study these moments because they teach us about the limits of resistance, about when to fight and when to yield." She turned her compound eyes toward the high windows. The night sky of Varan was visible, filled with unfamiliar stars. "But in all our history, we have never imagined a final stone that refuses to fall. A defender who keeps fighting even when defeat is certain. We thought such determination was impossible. That survival instinct would always win in the end." She looked back at Do-hyun. "Now I understand that we were wrong. Humans do not fight to survive. You fight to mean something. You fight so that your defeat becomes a story that echoes through time. You would rather be remembered as heroes who fell than survivors who gave up." Do-hyun nodded slowly. "You understand us well. I am beginning to." Vela rose from her chair, her massive body unfolding to its full height. "Sergeant Kim, Lieutenant Park, I will make a recommendation to the Coalition Council. I will suggest that human officers be included in all strategic planning sessions. Your perspective is too valuable to ignore." She paused at the edge of the table. "I will also recommend that the Masada protocols be studied by senior commanders, not to use against you, but to understand you. If humanity ever does face extinction, the Coalition should know what to expect. She turned and began to walk away, then stopped and looked back over her armored shoulder. And I will pray to whatever gods exist that we never see those protocols activated, because I have a feeling that they would be terrible to witness. With that, she strode out of the dining hall. The humans watched her go in silence. Yuna let out a long breath. Wow, that was something. Do-hyun picked up his drink and took a slow sip. It was necessary. Better they learn about us from words than from actions. The night continued. More aliens approached the human table, asking questions, seeking conversation. Some wanted to hear more stories. Others wanted to discuss tactics and strategies. A few simply wanted to shake hands, a human custom that had spread throughout the coalition. Do-hyun answered their questions patiently. He shared what he could and declined to share what he could not. He was a good representative of his species, diplomatic and thoughtful. But inside his mind, he kept thinking about Vila's question. Have you ever used these protocols? The truth was more complicated than his answer had suggested. The protocols existed in different levels, from simple resistance training to absolute last measures. Some of the lower levels had been used in various conflicts over the decades. Human units had implemented defensive doctrines based on the protocols when they were surrounded and outnumbered. Civilian populations had organized resistance movements using the same principles, but the highest levels, the ones that gave the protocols their name, had never been tested. No one wanted to test them. They existed as a guarantee, a promise written in contingency plans and secure databases. If the worst happened, humanity would not go quietly. Perhaps that was enough. Perhaps knowing that the protocols existed changed how others dealt with humanity. It was hard to bully a species that had already decided how they would face the end. The stars continued to shine through the windows of the dining hall. Somewhere out there, across thousands of light years, Earth spun on its axis. Billions of humans lived their lives, most of them never thinking about war or siege tactics or classified protocols. They raised families, built careers, loved and laughed and cried. But somewhere in bunkers and command centers, other humans kept watch. They studied the protocols. They ran simulations. They prepared for possibilities that hopefully would never come, because that was what humanity did. They hoped for the best and prepared for the worst. They built walls and then learned how to break them. They studied every way to die so that they could find every way to survive. The examination on siege tactics had been just a test, just a few hours of questions and answers in an alien academy. But it had revealed something profound about humanity's place in the galaxy. They were not the strongest species. They were not the smartest or the oldest. But they were perhaps the most stubborn, the most determined, the most willing to sacrifice everything for what they believed in. And in the cold mathematics of war, that counted for a great deal. Do-hyun finished his meal and stood up from the table. The other Marines followed. They walked together through the academy corridors, past ancient stones from 12 different worlds, past memorials to fallen soldiers from 100 conflicts at the entrance to their quarters. Do-hyun paused and looked back at the examination hall in the distance.